What would have been, and maybe it's moot at this point, but even going forward, but what would have been the alternate response by Israel to this that could have been pursued that you would have supported?
First of all, of course, the terrible carnage and the ongoing massacre in Gaza following it was preventable. We all know that Netanyahu himself in person, and of course the bigots around him, especially now, they wanted strong Hamas. They actually said so. Netanyahu said in 2019 explicitly that if one opposes the Palestinian state, one has to weaken the Palestinian Authority and strengthen Hamas. Even Smotrich, probably the worst bigot in this government, and there are many, he said in 2015, and I quote him exactly, word by word, he said, the Palestinian Authority is a burden, Hamas is an asset, end quote. And of course, it's not only words, they actually acted upon those words. Netanyahu kept Hamas alive, metaphorically as practically, by transferring money, huge amount of millions of dollars from Qatar to Hamas throughout his years as prime minister. So they are responsible. There are many other layers to their responsibility, by the way. But this is probably the main responsibility. If they would have done something for peace, which necessitates ending the occupation and the siege and Palestinian independence alongside the state of Israel, if they did something, that would have never happened. But they didn't. They are responsible for the terrible lot of everyone. Now, given that it happened already, the most important thing after the massacre, the disaster, the catastrophe of October 7, the first thing that the government of Israel had to do is to release the hostages. There were 240 Israeli hostages. They should have brought home immediately. Immediately. I want you to remember that Netanyahu didn't say anything about the hostages and about the end of the war. He didn't mention that the end of the war was to release the hostages. He said that the end of the war was to eliminate Hamas. Just after a few days, even 1 week, when he saw that the public attention was given to the hostages and that the public opinion was to release them, then it was the first time they actually mentioned them as being one of the ends of the war. So that means that shows and proves that his priorities are totally different from what we would have expected from a humane person, you know. And but that was the first thing, and of course, in order to prevent such disasters from happening again, there's only political solution, no military solution whatsoever. Everybody should accept that. The fanatics should be, isolated on both parties. No other way.
What talk to Netanyahu's incentives here, because we know that he is, facing criminal charges, and that those charges obviously can't go forward, at least with the speed and the intensity as they would if Israel was not engaged in this assault on Gaza. Speak to his incentives, if you could.
There are two main incentives which are connected. First, as you implied correctly, he is terrified of prison. He's a chicken shit, sorry for the words.
No, don't apologize.
He's a coward. He's a coward. He's terrified of prison. And he knows that if the trial goes on, he will find himself behind bars. And justly so. He's a crook, to say the least. Now, he will do whatever he can in order to stay out of prison. He's ready to sacrifice everyone, including the Israelis. That's the reason, by the way, that I emphasize all the time that our struggle is not against the Israelis, it's against the government of Israel, because the government of Israel turned itself to be the main enemy of the Israelis and the people who live in Israel. The government is our enemy. Because Netanyahu, for his own interests, to stay out of prison, he has been doing everything at the expense of Palestinians for sure, but of Israelis as well. And at the expense, by the way, of his allies in the United States, including the president, who may, pay the price of losing his presidency only for Netanyahu. That's crazy. I simply cannot understand the sanity behind it, because there's none.
Well, we can't understand it either. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah. So in order to stay in power, he pays whatever the most terrible bigots in his government actually want him to do. Including, for instance, there's still the danger of Israeli invasion to Rafah, which is going to be a terrible carnage.
Yeah.
So, and nobody stops him. And we all pay the price.
Well, I supposedly there is going to be a reckoning, and certainly there was more talk of this a couple of months ago. But do you have a sense, has there been much discussion within the context of the Knesset or amongst in various circles in Israel, how this this attack on October 7th was able to take place in what we, had been led to believe in this country was like the epitome of technological security. I mean, what were the factors that allowed that to happen? Because it at the very least, it's obviously a massive failure. But I wonder if how that's been discussed, because it certainly plays into the incentive structure for Netanyahu.
Sure, exactly. Look, the main fiasco, the main failure is of Netanyahu in person and the government. It is a political strategic failure, not a tactical one. Now, but of course, in addition to that, there were some failures, technologically speaking. There was a overlooking by some chief generals, etc., from messages and the warnings that came from below, from lower ranking soldiers. But that's as much as it is important, and it is marginal in comparison to Netanyahu and the government's decisions. And for instance, not too long before the massacre of October 7, Netanyahu moved 32, I think, military units from the border with Gaza to the West Bank in order to defend illegal settlements and outposts. And so this is, of course, a political and a tactic failure. But the main thing is a political one. And of course, the transforming of those units from the border with Gaza to the West Bank was driven by political things. It was mainly political, because they see the settlers in general, and the more bigot the settler is, so even more so, as the main asset of this government. There are few classes among the citizens of Israel. And number one, the so-called nobility, quote unquote, of course, are the settlers. They get whatever they like. Even now, when the economic situation in Israel is so dire, given the war and the situation, even the new budget, a massive amount of money, 1 billion shekel, went to the useless office of a settler, or Itztruk, whose office has nothing to do really. That amount of money went to the settlements at the expense of those thousands and thousands of people who lost everything in the south of Israel and are literally refugees in their own country, and also thousands of people in the north that had to be evacuated from their houses and their cities and villages because of the missiles from Hezbollah. They hardly got anything from the government. The vast majority of the budget goes to the settlements. They continue with the same attitude. And I'm afraid that the next disaster just around the corner. By the way, if I may, last March, exactly 1 year ago, March 23, there was a huge pogrom by settlers. On a daily basis, there are pogroms by settlers in the Palestinian village of Hawara. You know, they torched some houses, fields, etc. I sent a letter to Gallant, the Minister of Defense, and a formal letter in which I wrote that, of course, it is his own responsibility to stop and prevent such pogroms and crimes from being committed. But I also warned that if the pogroms of the settlers go on, we are all going to pay in blood. I said so to the Minister of Defense 1 year ago, 7 months before the massacre. And later on, I sent him another more or less 10 letters of the same kind. I haven't got one reply from him up till now. That shows you how it works.